Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we are of course taking a look at some of the huge shifts that we're seeing all across the market following YCS Anaheim. Now in some ways, I feel like we knew a lot of what was going to happen and which cards and decks were going to be dominant, but at the same time, it is another thing entirely to actually see everything play out in terms of what decks actually performed well and made up the top 8 and top 32 of the event. Now there really is just so much that I want to talk about following YCS Anaheim, because we did see a ridiculous number of buyouts and price spikes all over the market across the weekend. Because of that, today we're going to be mainly talking about the regular modern format, and then later on this week we'll talk about some of the Genesis format buyouts that happened over the weekend as well. Let's get started. Alright, so kicking things off, I think it only makes sense that we start off by looking at what actually won the event. Now this here is the Crystron K9 deck that Kamal Crooks played. He was first place after Swiss, going 13-1 in the Swiss rounds, and he was actually also the only Crystron K9 player to make the top cut as well. Now that said, I think it's the Crystron part that might get a bit overlooked and isn't as relevant. The K9 cards actually saw a lot of play on stream overall, and were in a lot of the top decks over the weekend, so they are what's commanding a lot of the attention here. So the first card that we're taking a look is K9 Noaroy. Noaroy is one of the brand new K9 cards to come out in Doom of Dimensions, and it's honestly one of the best cards in the entire set, despite only being an ultra rare. This card put in a ton of work this weekend, since it really does generate a ton of advantage, bringing Jokul out of the deck, who can then search for another K9 monster, but also that ability to look at your opponent's hand for free and find out what deck they're playing, as well as what hand traps you now have to play around. It's absolutely incredible. Now typically before, a lot of players were only looking at playing one copy of Noaroy, but as you guys just saw on Kamal's list, he's actually playing 3 Noaroy and 3 Case, so really prioritizing getting that knowledge early on. Now before YCS Anaheim, Noaroy was still an expensive card for an ultra rare. We were seeing them at around $15 to $16 or so on TCG Player, and I believe at the YCS the vendors had them for about $20. However, the card definitely jumped in price over the weekend. By Monday, we're seeing the card sitting firmly at over $30 per copy. We have to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, since Doom of Dimensions is a pretty underwhelming set in terms of value, so there's definitely fewer copies of Noaroy on the market, since not as many people are going and cracking open boxes. But nevertheless, the card has still proven to be incredibly strong and will probably continue to be a very dominant card for the next couple of formats. Now with Noaroy, of course, it's literally a brand new card, so we don't need to worry about the card being reprinted anytime soon. And of course, the card is likely to retain a lot of its value and stay relatively high in price, because it's going to continue to be meta relevant, regardless of if that's alongside Crystron, Vanquish Soul, Mitsurugi, whatever the other half of the deck is. At the same time though, I think we have to remember that it's probably not going to go that much higher in price. It's already one of the priciest ultra rares from a core set that we've seen in quite a while, so while it could stay around $30, I'm not expecting it to hit 35 or 40 unless we saw something like a crazy ban list that made K9 the only playable deck or clearly the best deck. So all in all, I think Noaroy is obviously a hold if you are going to play it. It's going to be a very meta relevant card moving forward. But for copies that you don't need, I think this is a card you sell but not at a discount. It's going to be something that people will look for over the next couple of months, so it's not like you're going to struggle to sell it. Instead, you should expect full value for it, but if the card is basically at its peak price, there's no point in holding on to any unnecessary copies you aren't going to use. Moving on, we're actually talking about a couple of cards we looked at not too long ago, so we're just going to talk about them really briefly. The first one is Platinum Gadget. This is a Machine Link 2 monster that requires 2 machines to make. Now basically this card lets you get Scrapper Cycler onto the field even if you've already burned your normal summon on Noaroy. Of course, this is a card that was used by Kamal as a way to bridge the K9 cards into the Crystron engine, but it is also used in Orcus decks to send Harp Horror to the graveyard as well. So yeah, nothing too crazy here, but the card has done nothing but climb in price for the last few months. The last time we talked about this card, it was a few weeks ago, and this card was sitting at around $10 to $12. Well, now here we are a month later, and the card is right up at $20 per copy. Now with this one, I do think it's a really obvious sell. The card has just one printing from back in Dual Power, so with the play it has seen recently, it should definitely receive a reprint within the next couple of upcoming reprint sets. and also it's only somewhat meta relevant. Like, it's good in Crystron K9 and Orcus K9, but it's not used by other decks like Mitsurugi, Dracotail, or Yummy. That said, this is definitely a card you want to sell off if you have any extras before that reprint comes along and destroys its value. Alright, so another one we just talked about, it's Artifact Dagda. So as I'm sure you guys saw, Kamal was running the Artifact Mjolnir lock in the main board at YCS Anaheim, and it literally won him quite a few games. Right now, I think it's one of the most degenerate things you can do in the game, but at the same time, being able to do degenerate things is going to win you games a lot of the time. So Dagda saw a pretty big jump up in price after the YCS. I think last week when we looked at Dagda, this was around $7 to $8. Well, over the last day or so, the card, I think, hit a high of about $25 before eventually now settling at around the $15 mark. But yeah, just like with Platinum Gadget, this feels like a really obvious sell. Right, somehow Dagda only has one printing. This was from back in Dual Overload, but with just that one printing and still it's seeing meta play, this definitely should get a reprint. Then again, at the same time, I think it's also very likely that this card could get banned, which would also tank its value. And just like with Platinum Gadget, this is something that is very good in a limited number of dedicated strategies, right? For some reason, it's only good in Crystron K9, it seems, and Crystron K9 isn't even really that popular of a deck, with inclusion limited to 1 and a lot of people saying that it's just a little bit too bricky for them. So yeah, despite the success, Dagda is another card you'll probably want to move off of as soon as possible if it's something that you aren't actively playing. Next up, we'll talk about a couple of cards from other top decks at YCS Anaheim. So you guys can see here the players and decks that made up the top 8. Obviously, Crystron K9 and Ryzeal are the odd ones out, since everything other than that is either Yummy, Mitsurugi, or a combination of the two. That said, I think this event really showcased how those two are probably going to be the most popular decks of the upcoming format. Now, the deck list that you guys can see here is Cam Neal's, who got 2nd place at the event with Mitsurugi Yummy. Now, a lot of the lists did look virtually the same, and they all used Zombie Vampire to try to bridge into the Yummy engine, which was really cool to see happen. So the Mitsurugi cards have been pretty strong ever since their release, but they've really been popping off since the most recent ban list. They did lose King of Feral Imps, but I feel like that was really only a hit to Ryzeal Mitsurugi, since the pure Mitsurugi deck didn't really need to run it at all. However, Mitsurugi has gotten a ton of attention at the YCS, and for very good reason. Both Pure Mitsurugi and Yummy Mitsurugi were extremely popular at the top tables of YCS Anaheim. Now, on the most recent list, we didn't see prayers get hit, so everyone felt like Mitsurugi was going to be good this format, and as a result, Mitsurugi Ritual went from being $10 before the ban list up to being $30 right after the list, as you guys can see on the chart here. However, with YCS Anaheim now concluded, we've seen Mitsurugi Ritual jump up in price once again to the $40 mark. Obviously kind of crazy for an ultra rare from a core set, but it is looking like it'll continue to be a dominant deck for the next little while. One thing worth noting is that while Ryzeal Mitsurugi generally played just one copy of this card, a lot of Yummy Mitsu players were actually running 2, so players switching over will generally need to pick up an extra copy. Now, moving forward, I do think that this is a really good card to have. It's from Supreme Darkness, so it shouldn't be reprinted until the 2026 tins, unless they randomly decide to reprint it in something early. And I do expect the card to remain very meta relevant for the next while. Maybe if they hit prayers on an upcoming ban list, it'll fall off, but it should be good for the foreseeable future. That said, I would just hold on to however many copies it is you need to play with, and throw the rest into your trade binder. Just like what I said with Noaroy, I think Mitsurugi Ritual doesn't have that much room to go up higher in price, so there's not really a point in holding on to too many copies. Offload your extras, but move them at or close to retail, since this is still going to be a very in-demand card that you should expect maximum value for the next couple of months. Here's another pretty big one, it's Marshmaow Yummy. So this is the chase card out of Doom of Dimensions, and it's a really amazing card for the Yummy strategy. It lets you get a Yummy spell from your graveyard back to hand, or if it's summoned by a synchro, you can take a Yummy field spell from your deck or banishment and place it to your side of the field. So this card is really free for Yummy. Not only is it an extra name so that you can combo, but it makes surprise free since you can surprise to Reborn Marshmaow and then add back surprise to your hand, but it also means that you don't lose the game if your single copy of Mignon gets banished, since you can simply retrieve it. Anyways, this is the priciest card out of Doom of Dimensions. Before the YCS, we were seeing this card quite low at around $45 to $50. However, by Saturday morning, this card had already jumped up to around $60 per copy, and then by the time the event was over, this was around $67 each, anywhere between $65 to $70 per copy. Of course, the deck did see a ton of play at the event, so it was definitely expected. Obedient School getting limited was a nerf to the deck, but the deck absolutely survived and is still in a great spot competitively. So I feel like in terms of value, this card is exactly the same as Mitsurugi Ritual. Marshmaow is obviously newer, it definitely shouldn't see a reprint until next year's tins at the earliest, but it will continue to be meta relevant for the foreseeable future. Honestly, even after an upcoming ban list, I think Yummy would still be a thing because it feels like it's a deck that's fairly difficult to nerf. That said, hold on to your 3 copies if you're still planning on playing the deck, but I think you should probably want to sell the rest of your copies at retail while it's at an all-time high. I could definitely see it being a possibility that the hype for the deck falls off a little bit in the next couple of weeks as people are experimenting with other decks like the Radiant Typhoon stuff, and I could realistically see it going back down to around the $50 to $60 range. And finally, the last card we'll be looking at for today is Psy-framegear Delta. So this seems to be a bit random, but this was actually an extremely popular hand trap at YCS Anaheim. There were actually a bunch of deck lists that I saw that were main decking the 1 Gamma and Driver along with 3 copies of Delta, and they were actually doing pretty well up at the top tables. It seems that a lot of players are choosing to main deck Delta just as a way of dealing with spells in general. You can use it to hit Ritual or Prayers in the Mitsurugi matchup, Ketu or Rahu against Dracotail, and then you're also hitting cards like Thrust or Talent so that you don't get punished by using hand traps, or even Called by the Grave to ensure that your other hand traps are able to resolve. Those plays could single-handedly win you the game. Now, in terms of availability, Delta has just 2 printings. It was a rare back when it came out in High Speed Riders, and then it was a super in an OTS tournament pack about a year or 2 ago as well. This was a fairly cheap card, still worth a couple of dollars for quite a while, but in the last week or so we've seen both versions of the card shoot all the way up to around $8 per copy. Now with this one, it definitely feels like it should see a reprint soon. With just 2 printings, it probably needs another holo printing or 2 just so that people have access to it. And then in terms of meta relevance, I think it's probably like a medium. Like, it's not something that every single deck is going to use right off the bat, but it's definitely something that's been picking up in popularity, and I do see more people using it. That said, I feel like it's completely up to your own personal preference and playstyle. Like for me, I hate running unnecessary bricks in my deck, so I don't like the package because of the driver, but obviously it's understandable how this card can win you the game in certain scenarios. That said, I have this as a sell, especially if you happen to have the rares. At the very least, maybe keep a set for yourself to play with if it is something that you're interested in trying out, but look to move all of your extra copies while they're currently at an all-time high. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely great to meet so many of you all at YCS Anaheim. I know that the event was really busy, especially because of the way that the day 2 changed with the extra rounds of Swiss, and then Top Cut feels a little bit later because we were also trying to fit in a bunch of the Genesis format stuff as well. But I should be going to Pittsburgh, so hopefully I'll get to meet a bunch more of you there as well. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.